So earlier this year, I made a video about the character of Éowyn and how I felt that the Lord of the Rings movies did not really understand what the point of her character arc was. Within that video, I touched a little bit on the criticism that the ultimate end of Éowyn's story presents this misogynistic message that women should never aspire to be more than a wife and mother. That's not true, but if you want to know about that, then watch the video. But I've been thinking for a while about how people claim that Tolkien's stories perpetuate this sexism that is commonly seen in fantasy, where the women are just fair maidens who basically just exist as window dressing, while the men are the ones that get to go off and fight and accomplish things and have personalities. But I strongly disagree with this viewpoint, and I argue that if you look for it, you'll see that the women of Middle-earth are actually quite empowered, and they're not just sitting around letting the men do all the work. Sometimes that's quite the opposite of what's going on. And one of the best places you can find this is in one of my most favorite books of all time, The Silmarillion. First off, I should probably point out how many times I've made this joke.
A strong independent woman. A strong independent woman. A strong independent woman. A strong independent woman.
But there's a reason for that, and the reason is that the women in the Silmarillion, they don't mess around. They get stuff done. Obviously, half of the Valar are women, and no, they're not as powerful as the male Valar, but that doesn't mean they're a bunch of slouches. We have Yavanna and Yenna creating the Two Trees of Valinor, and Varda making all the stars in the sky, and among the Maiar we have characters like Aryan, the driver of the sun. I'd especially like to highlight how Aryan is described in contrast to the male character who drives the moon.
Aryan the Maiden was mightier than he, and she was chosen because she had not feared the heats of Lorelin, and was unhurt by them, being from the beginning a spirit of fire, whom Melkor had not deceived or drawn to his service. Too bright were the eyes of Aryan for even the Eldar to look on, and leaving Valinor she forsook the form and raiment which like the Valar she had worn there, and she was as a naked flame, terrible in the fullness of her splendor.
Does that sound weak and helpless to you? I don't think so. Especially since it's made clear on multiple occasions how much Morgoth and his servants fear and hate the sun. In a lot of ways, Ygal Aryan is one of the most powerful forces against evil in all of Middle-earth. And then we have Aryan's fellow Maya Melian, who basically kept an entire kingdom single-handedly under her protection for hundreds of years. And how could I not mention her daughter, the fairest child of elves or men, Luthien Tinuviel. One of the things I love about the story of Ben Luthien, and there are a lot of things I love about that story, but something I find so funny is that Beren really doesn't accomplish all that much. Like, he tries so hard, but a lot of time he's getting kind of overshadowed by everyone around him. Like, Luthien is the one who has to go save him, she releases all these captives from Sauron, and she also manages to sing Morgoth to sleep. I feel like people aren't talking about this much. She essentially managed to overpower and knock out the most powerful being in all of Middle-earth. That is insane, and that is awesome. All throughout the rest of the book we get characters like Erethdel, Morwen, Yenor, Idril, who are all described as being hardy of heart, majestic, fearless, wise. You just can't tell me that these are weak, helpless characters when that is demonstrably untrue. And of course, although she doesn't feature strongly in the Silmarillion, we gotta talk about Galadriel. Galadriel is honestly one of the most powerful figures in Middle-earth by the time of the Lord of the Rings. She's like 7,000 years old, she has a ring of power, and she was so powerful that she could read Sauron's mind, but he couldn't read hers. And I don't know whether or not this was technically canon, because the canonicity of a lot of the stuff surrounding Galadriel and Celeborn prior to the Lord of the Rings is really squirrely, but Tolkien did write that during the kinslaying she picked up a sword and fought for her mother's kin. That's pretty awesome. But since I brought up The Lord of the Rings, this is probably the area that people would have most complaints about, because The Silmarillion is a book that no one has read or cared about, judging by the views on my abridged videos, so the real question is, why are there so few women in The Lord of the Rings? It's true, alright, there are very few female characters within LOTR. The ones that are there are pretty powerful, but when you've got a ratio of like 12 prominent male characters to 3 or 4 female ones, being generous, I can understand the frustration. And here's where I admit that The Lord of the Rings is not the book for female representation. Representation in general isn't really something I want to talk about because who am I to talk about representation? Although I guess I am a woman, so I would have some level of authority in this area, but I'm also a 19-year-old who knows nothing. Anyway, the point is that J.R.R. Tolkien was not a feminist, he was not trying to write the ultimate female fantasy. And that's not really a bad thing. Considering that these stories were written ranging from like the 20s to the 50s, it really shouldn't be that surprising that they don't have the female representation that we're used to nowadays. And you can't fault something for coming from the time when it was written. Some of this stuff was honestly pretty progressive for that time. There are plenty of women in positions of power, the men aren't the only ones who control things. And sure, we don't see a lot of women going out to chop off orc heads, but do we really need that? As a woman, I think it's pretty cool that the women of Middle-earth are powerful in ways other than just brute strength. Maybe it's magical power, or ruling power, or just strength of will. I honestly find that to be a lot more admirable and aspirational because I don't know about you, but I don't think I'm going to be going out to actually slay monsters in my day-to-day life. And sure, I'm not going to be trying to lull the ultimate evil to sleep with the power of my divine voice either, but I can admire the courage that went into that. In the end, to some degree, I understand the criticisms that people have. Female representation is a good thing, and if you want it, go read an X-Men comic. But even though Tolkien may not have set a standard or anything, overall, I think he did a lot better than people give him credit for. That's all I've got for today. As always, be sure to leave a comment with any and all thoughts you have on this topic. I hope you enjoyed this discussion about the women of Middle-earth, and until next time, le feo, le Melian, savalas a la lev. Which means, thank you, I love you, have joy and laughter. Believe it or not, that's one of the first times I've ever tried to actually speak Elvish. It probably sounded terrible. Anyway, goodbye.